Today I want to talk about punishing bad openings. Black has a lot of bad openings, and you can use a lot of the same responses against a wide variety of Black's play. I recently managed to win 35 games in a row, which I was stoked about, using mostly these simple tricks. I won most of the games out of the opening, so I'm going to share them with you. Let's start with my typical opening trap against e6 and e5. I talked about this in my previous video, so I'm not going to explore it nearly as in depth. But basically, against e6 and e5, you freeze these corner squares over here and play bishop to b5. So against a lot of anything that doesn't threaten checkmate or move the king out of the way, you have the same response. It's always queen h5, and this will just win. In this game, the opponent just resigned. Let's go through some games when the queen pawn is developed. When this pawn is developed before the king's pawn, it is often a very bad move. In this game, you can see that after we take, the opponent took, and this is basically checkmate. Due to freeze spells, the game can last longer, so it's not literally checkmate, but the opponent didn't even use a freeze spell and allowed me to take the king on the following move. Obviously, the opponent could have been a little bit more resilient. The most resilient defense would have been freezing the bishop and then probably just clearing space for the king like this. So then after we make a move such as queen out to h5, the king would be forced due to a double attack from both the queen and bishop. It counts as a double attack because we could use jump spell on the pawn and take the king on the following turn. So the king must move, and then this is still checkmate, although it would have delayed checkmate for another turn. So let's take a look at another example of this type of mate. So this is a very similar game. This, again, is just checkmate. And once again, the opponent didn't put up any sort of resilient defense, but there was no resilient defense. Because what can they do? They could freeze our bishop, but there's no way out of this because after queen out here, what do? The king can't move, and yet there's a double attack due to jump spell on the king. So this is simply checkmate. As you can see, when the queen pawn is developed before the king pawn, always look for this check. It's often fatal. Let's see another example. So the previous two were with the white pieces. Here I want to show how you can often play. I don't know that this is 100% sound, but it has never failed for me. Whenever an opponent leads with the queen pawn, they often want the follow up with c3. But after this move, if they take, this is just checkmate. So in the game, it was what their best response should be is this, and if we take, they have to recapture with the queen, and then this is fine, but we also don't have to take. So I think that this is a very reasonable position to try to play. Um, Pretty much every time I've played this move, though, people take it and just fall for the immediate checkmate trap. So whether or not you want to play this way is up to you. It is a good position. You're not going to just win with black out of the opening typically. I think that this is a fair try at a trap. I don't think that the downside of achieving this position, like, I don't think that this is that bad. Let's look at another example. Once again, we have the black pieces, and they advance the d pawn. I really like just like advancing my king's pawn to e5 after the queen's pawn is advanced like that. Here, the opponent tried to win the bishop, but they forgot about checkmate. So the queen came out. This is a super common tactic. The queen hitting the king from the other side. They took the queen because they thought it was free, and then we won. Well, the game should have lasted one more move. Is the king should have come here, and then this is checkmate. The opponent can't really intercede because we have a jump spell. But as you can see, this check is very, very, very nasty. Always look for it. Let's look at one last example of this type of mate. Oh, that's literally the same exact pattern. People seem to really like taking that on, and yeah, I would say maybe if the person was rated like 1700, maybe they won't take the pawn, but some 1600s might not. But a lot of 1400s and 1500s will just take the pawn and immediately lose. So let's talk about a different thing. This is one of the two responses that doesn't, by force, lose immediately. The better move is freezing our bishop and playing in this mirrored fashion. I talked about that in my previous video, but this is a move that doesn't lose immediately. It's not a good move, but it doesn't lose immediately. So in this position, I think it's kind of funny that I want to put this next. The best response that I have found is advancing the d pawn. And I know I just said a bunch of times, don't advance the d pawn. Well, here it's good to advance the d pawn because of the way that king blocks in both the dark squared bishop and the queen. And in developing our dark squared bishop quickly is super, super important because the king is on a dark square. So this opponent decides, let's try to kick the bishop away. I think this is a super reasonable move. So we back off. Then the opponent tries to get a little bit smart. It was sort of a meaningless check because we just moved to the side and the opponent took our rook. But what they didn't remember is we have a freeze spell, and if you can freeze a king and anything that could intercept it, then this is just checkmate. So, as you can see, developing the dark squared bishop quickly in this position, which is a position I've had many times, you'd need to play either d3 or d4. I think d4 is better. The king is super, super weak, so opening the center is good for us. So let's move on to the next example. All right. One move we could have made is simply just taking the queen with a jump spell here. That obviously wins the game. What I played in the game is I just played this move, which just wins on the spot because if the king moves, we take the queen, and this is actually better than simply taking the queen with a jump spell because this takes the queen without using a jump spell. Obviously, if you don't have to use a jump spell, don't use a jump spell. So if they just taken the queen, obviously, we win. So the king has to move because of the double attack, and then this comes to check. We win the queen, and that's game over. So the opponent checkmated that way. Great. Let's look at another example. So I don't have a ton of examples in my recent games against this particular opening, so I'm actually going to go through a more wide range of um, openings against this knight move because it's a little bit. I used to play this move, and therefore I know a lot of tricks against it because whenever I played someone good, they played it against me. So this is the move. This is not a move. That's not a good move because you freeze, take the knight. The opponent came up with actually a pretty resourceful defensive plan. Why this is good is because it covers this square, e5, which is a square the queen often wants to come to. Because after the queen comes out, we have a double attack using jump spell on either of these pawns. The king must move. So here, we can take the rook. If they hadn't developed the bishop, let's say they had developed like a knight or something, then this is just checkmate because it's a double attack on the king. He has to move. This is checkmate. So the opponent credit him for finding that move, which doesn't immediately lose, but we do still win the rook, which is plenty good. So then the opponent tries to trap my queen, but seemed to forget about the timer on jump spell, so he just let me take the king. There was no way for him to win my queen. Obviously, he had a position that wasn't lost until he forgot about jump spell. He could have just like gone here and I would have won a bunch of material, and he's losing by a lot. But yeah, forgot about jump spell. So yeah, let's go through some other variations of this line. So they all begin like this, but there's quite a few different responses. So one every response that anytime you see this move, you know you take, and then after pretty much any move that the opponent makes, whether it's knight here, whether it's pawn here, obviously all of those are also coming with freeze because they're not going to get mated. All of those moves get met with this move. It doesn't look like it's doing anything, but it is because the opponent has to take the bishop, and after this, you're just forking the king and the rook. They have to intercede. They can either do it with the. There's a lot of ways they could do it. Doesn't really matter which way they do it. You win the rook, and you haven't even used a jump spell. You're just way ahead on material. So you've traded a bishop for a knight, and then you've just won a rook. So this is completely crushing. And the same holds true no matter what they tried to defend with. So, yep. Yeah, you use that same trick against this opening. Now let's talk about what to do against this move. This move aims at trying to defend, like sort of like preemptively using prophylaxis to prevent the queen from coming to h5. And it does, in fact, prevent queen h5. For once, that's not the move. So against this, you still do play this move. And then this is how I used to play. You play this. This is how I used to play as black. I should specify. But then you have this move. So you're attacking the bishop now. After black takes, you win the bishop. And then black's best move is nf6. And you're not threatening to win the rook because the queen protects the rook through the king. I'll show you that. So that's not a good move. We're not threatening that. So this is, it almost looks playable because if you can trap the queen, then obviously you're in really, really, really good shape. But you actually just can't trap the queen. So white here, you play this move. And I thought I came up with a really good idea in one of my games, playing this move. So let's break this move down. Why does it look like it's good? Well, it looks like this queen is trapped. If it goes here, the rook jumps the pawn, takes the queen. If the queen takes the rook, well, you jump the knight, take the queen. White doesn't have a jump spell, so it can't jump the knight and take your queen. So I thought I was a genius when I was playing as black in this position for finding this move. Apparently, my opponent was smarter and found this move. And what do you do against this move? It's a double attack against black's queen, which is frozen. The white queen attacks the black queen, and the white bishop attacks the black queen also. And since it can't move, there's no way to prevent losing your queen. So the best you can do is just move the rook over and freeze freeze the queen and move the rook over. Black will then take that queen. White will take black's queen. Black takes white's queen. And now white takes the rook. White is up a tremendous amount of material. So, but white no longer has jump spells. So this position is, I think that this position is better for white. So this is the line that made me stop playing knight to knight to c6 on move 1. Let's actually count the material up. White has an additional 8 points of material for 2 jump spells, basically. And a free spell, but free spells aren't worth that much. If you want to play this with black, you can. I don't love it. This is the critical line that you have to know. Let's see, what other responses have I seen? The other response I've seen, you do the same thing. Freeze, take. The opponent sort of has to go here, prevent queen to h5. However, in this position, we've already won a knight, and if we can attack another knight, and they take like this, we are now up a knight. So this is obviously good. There's no checkmate in this line, but winning material is good enough sometimes. Hopefully, you would be able to convert that. Let me think if there's any other lines I've faced. I don't think that there is. I think that pretty much sums up all the lines against the knight moving here. So to recap, after knight to c6, you will always play bishop to b5. And no matter what the opponent plays, whether it's there, there, or there, you will always freeze and take the knight. Following this move, the opponent has to freeze the bishop, and no matter what they do, you will always go here with the queen, queen h5, or in the case of advancing the knight, which is the same position as would be reached in this line, as you can see, that's the same position. Um, then you play this move. And against the line where the opponent plays in this manner, then you bring the queen to g4, hitting the bishop. And then that was the line that involved the queen black trying to trap the queen, black trying to trap white's queen, black bringing the queen out to d4, and then white bringing the bishop out to e3. And there was an exchange of pieces. It's somewhat playable for black, but I think it's much more playable for white. So that should encapsulate all the different lines when facing knight to c6. Keep going. So in this game, against a 1700, I'm going to show you that even 1700s don't really know their opening. So they played this move, which is actually a very bad move, and I believe loses by force, especially the way that they played it. So they thought 30 seconds, played e6. What could possibly go wrong? Well, a lot, because the king can't just take, because we can just freeze their king, develop literally any piece, and how do they get out of this? They can't move their king, they can't interpose a piece. We have a jump spell, that's just checkmate. Now, they could have played much more resiliently. The probably most resilient play would have been jumping over their pawn with the bishop in order to defend the f7 pawn with their light squared bishop. Now let's take a look at this position, because this isn't so straightforward. So we take with the queen on f7. Obviously, they have to freeze back. Their best move would be this, but we actually have a pretty sneaky move here. If we jump the pawn, keep the bishop, that's checkmate. So importantly, whenever you're taking the f7 pawn, don't freeze here. This loses the queen, because after freeze and then knight to h6, you lose your queen, or you have to use a jump spell and then lose your queen anyway, because we don't have a jump spell anymore. So the queen's no longer defended by this bishop. because he had to use the jump spell in order to take the knight. So that loses the queen. So make sure to freeze here, because this is checkmate by force. Otherwise, it's not. So this is another. That's just like a good trick um, for a good defensive trick. Try to lock in your mind. Oh yeah, the bishop can jump over its own pawn just to defend the pawn, and it actually creates problems for white. It's not. It's not super easy for white to see that mate. It's there, but most people won't see it. And in other positions, maybe it actually would defend against me perfectly. So let's move on to the next game. So the last two games I want to show are the category of mate, I would say, is the opponent uses freeze when not threatening checkmate, and then you can threaten checkmate with a freeze. So let me say that one more time. So the last two games are going to be when the opponent uses freeze to not threaten a lethal checkmate, and then you are able to find a check while using a freeze to deliver checkmate. So the opponent tries to be tricky and thinks, oh, I can win their bishop, but they forgot about this simple check. There's no way for black to interpose. The king can't move. That means no matter what they do, we jump over the pawn, take the king in the next move. It would have been tempting to play something like this, but this is actually not checkmate. So it is not as accurate because the king can move still. And sure, you're going to win, but I don't know, it's not as trivial. You're up a jump spell, this is completely winning, but play accurately, find checkmate when you can. If the opponent uses a freeze and they aren't really threatening anything super crucial, think, oh, maybe I can lose the piece they're threatening. And if you can find checkmate, then great. So let's take a look at the last game, which is, again, using freezes. So in this game, it almost follows the line I talked about in a previous video. So they play in the best way against this opening trap. They freeze my bishop and bring their own bishop out, attacking my king. So this is the best move. They then also play the best move. We retreat our bishop. Then I don't think that this is the best move, but it is a very reasonable move, and it is a good move. So we attack their bishop, they attack our bishop. We get this position, and so this is getting into the middle game-ish section of the game, but it's not really an opening trap. But it is a quick win that's won using the freeze after a non lethal freeze by the opponent. So here we take the opponent's pawn because our bishop defends the knight. The opponent freezes our knight and then attacks our queen. So I think what they were trying to do is buy time in order to like get their pieces unforked somehow. Obviously, it doesn't really work. Even if we just respond in the most mundane way possible with this, we reinforce the threat. And so, like, this move was not a good move. Um, but can we find a very accurate response? We could just move the queen away out of danger, but that's not a testing move. So I wanted to find something that just wins the game. So I played takes bishop, even though the bishop is defended by the knight, because I wanted them to play knight takes queen. Because now, what did I see? We can freeze the king. With check, no piece can take the knight, king can't move. They don't have freeze back yet. Then you have one more turn until they get that back. So this is just checkmate. So that's the last type of trap that I wanted to uh, show, and hopefully all these tips will help you to rank up quickly. So let's recap a couple key principles that we learned. One is that you have to look for maneuvers where the queen comes out to h5. It is often checkmate, even though it might look like, oh no, I can't go there. I'm going to lose my queen. No, you're not. The bishop is hitting the king. Just think it through. Can they actually take the queen? The answer is very, very often, no, they cannot. So always look for this move. Queen h5. It'll win you so many games. Like, this is still good. Even though the pawn hits the queen, the rook could hit the queen, you still bring the queen out because the king has to move. And if it does, great, you won. And if it doesn't, then great, you still won. So always, always, always look for queen h5. When the knight comes out, you bring the bishop out, just like you would against the e6, e5 variation, except this time you don't use freeze immediately. This time you just put pressure on the knight, and this is already a bad position for black. The best line, which is the line I used to play for black in this position, is still not good because it fails similarly to all the others. You freeze, take the knight. I'm not going to go through that whole line again, but in most of the lines, you end up winning the rook by using the queen on h5 again. Queen h5. This was a game we played. Queen h5. The opponent can come here. That's what they did in the game I showed earlier. You win the rook. So a lot of times when the knight comes out like this, queen h5, you win the rook. If you can, look for a way to win the rook without using a jump spell. If there's not a way to do that, use a jump spell, win the rook. Jump spells, at least your first one, is definitely worth less than a rook. So using it to take a rook is a good idea. And lastly, anytime you see an opponent use a freeze to try to win a piece rather than checkmate, always look for checkmate. And a checkmate is just delivering a check while the king is frozen and no piece can take it. So with these tips, hopefully you can win some games. The first point that I made in this video was to always look for this king check on bb5. It's checkmate whenever the king's pawn is not moved because the king can't move and opposing doesn't work. It's still often a very powerful check, even if the king's pawn has moved. It's just often not checkmate in that case. So always look for this check. It's very good. Thank you so much for watching. If you've watched this far, it means a lot. Please give a like and comment what your favorite parts are, or if I made any mistakes, or if you have any analysis to add on top of what I went over. feel free to leave a comment. Please subscribe if you enjoyed this. Thank you so much.